Okay, I just want to really quickly discuss conservation of momentum in terms of turnover. So mainstream turnover is going to tell you we're looking for this scoop out of the round off to get our feet in front so that we can then launch back into the next skill and pick up some amount of rotation in the process. So this is Jake Jarman. We're going to use him as an example, and then we'll get specifically into the physics. He's doing a huge pass, 3.5 twisting double layout, tons of speed, tons of power, and basically sticks this thing cold. So let's check it out. Boom, super huge. So when we're watching big passes like this, it's easy to get caught up in the speed, but we're gonna slow it down so we can look at what's actually happening. Again, mainstream turnover will tell you from this position, we're looking for that big scoop with his feet in front of his body. Conservation of momentum, however, and a little bit of biomechanics applied will tell you that's really not possible. So let's see what happens from this position. His feet come down, and actually they contact behind his body. So the exact opposite of what we consider turnover, and it right on board with what we consider conservation of momentum. So we actually see in this round off, feet behind him, then his body sinks to a vertical position with the center mass directly on top of his feet, and he finishes by moving behind his feet to throw into this back handspring. In short, this is something like what you would see on a TikTok on trampoline, a front handspring, back handspring, where you're contacting, your body goes straight in the middle, and then you're coming off the backside in a mirror image. So we can see that, contacting behind him, sinking into that vertical in the middle, and then coming off the backside. Now let's get into the physics of it and why turnover and conservation of momentum don't appear to be in agreement. Simply put, conservation of momentum tells you that if you have a specific amount of rotation when you leave the ground, you're going to have that all the way until you contact the ground on the other side. So if we have X rotation, when we start, we're going to land with X rotation. Turnover, however, wants you to speed up a part of your body. So we have X rotation, and we are trying to speed up our lower body so that our feet can get in front of everything else. That's the idea behind it. Conservation of momentum tells you that if you add in one area, you also have to subtract in another area, because the end result has to be the same as what we started with. So when you play this through, if I'm increasing the speed of my lower body, I am also at the same time decreasing the speed of my upper body. And that's why we're not gonna see mainstream turnover play out in real-time tempo tumbling. Because in order to create that added speed of the lower body, you also have to stop your upper body. So a red flag for an athlete who has been drilled on turnover constantly and are coached on turnover in their actual tumbling passes is once they have done this, because their lower body has sped up so far and their upper body has stalled so far, the only way to continue on is to then throw your head out backwards. So let's take this back to Jarman. And we can see the same thing at play. So instead of seeing that increased speed in the lower body and a stall in the upper body, what we see is pure conservation of momentum. So he has some amount of rotation when he comes in, and he maintains that same rotation through the second half of his round off. Simply put, as his legs are coming down, his chest continues moving up. There's no stall. That's why we see the TikTok motion play out. The fun thing about physics is the more you look at it, the deeper you get into it. So what we talked about before, the conservation of momentum, is a fairly surface level view of what's at play in turnover. So now we're going to go just a little bit deeper into it and talk about what we're actually getting out of the spring floor. So the fun thing about tumbling and the difference between our sport and, say, cheerleading is that we do have the advantage of a springed floor. When you approach it from a turnover perspective, as we talked about before, you're getting that lower body speed increase and the stalled upper body. I'm going to draw that one more time. Something like this. Our blue line is signifying the floor. That white squiggle is signifying our spring. When you contact initially, you have some amount of downward force. In this part of this round off, we have not yet fully maximized the spring. As your chest now tries to catch up with the rotation, the force you're putting into the floor also shifts based on where your center of mass is. So maybe we initially had some downward pressure, but as that chest moves, the force we put into the floor is also going to move. So by the time that we get in a position where we could fully maximize the compression of the spring, the direction of our force is already past the spring itself. A real-world example of this would be like skipping a stone on water. So before the full weight of the stone is actually pressing into the surface, it's already moved past that area. Skipping. So we take a look now at what Jarman was doing, that more of that TikTok motion, where he's contacting with his feet a little bit behind him, not much, but a little. Initially, we might have some amount of forward or some amount of backward pressure into the floor, but as his body continues to rotate into that vertical position, the force does the same thing. So by the time we're in a position where we can fully compress the spring, all of our force is downward into the spring. So the difference between turnover and a TikTok motion is the same difference between skipping across the surface and fully plunging into the water. So Jarman's getting a maximized spring every time he contacts the floor. If we were to turn over, like we in this top scenario, we are getting a partial amount of compression. So the cool thing about someone who has mastered this TikTok technique is that not only are they taking full advantage of this compression into the spring floor as they stand up into that vertical, but they're also mimicking that with the elasticity of their body. So take Jarman. As he approaches the floor in this manner, you're going to notice that his knees bend into the sink. So as he approaches the floor, we saw that force this way. Naturally, as he passes through that vertical, his force is going to press this way. But he's also creating that same thing in his knees. So as his knees, or as his feet approach the floor, he's getting that same exact effect here. So when he sinks fully into this vertical position, not only is the spring fully compressed, but his knees are also fully compressed. So he's going to get the benefit of that floor launching and the elasticity of his legs launching him. So let's take a look. Here's that round off. Here is that approach. Here we go. There's that position we were talking about. Maybe he has, I'm going to use a different color just so we can see it. Maybe he has some force like this, but as he sinks, that force is going to change until it's directly downward right here. We can see his toes kind of sink into the floor there. But he's also doing the same thing with his knees. Maybe it's a backward pressure, but as he sinks, those knees are fully compressed. So on the outside of this, again, this is full mastery. We're getting this floor launching right there, and we're also getting his knees launching in tandem.